Well, hello again and welcome to this little part of YouTube which belongs to me. It's called WoolThreadPaint and this is my channel on YouTube where I talk about mostly things to do with yarn and therefore crochet. The yarn is behind me here, but there are also other little bits of textiles, embroidery and just whatever is going on in my day-to-day life, I suppose. A very warm welcome if you've never come across this channel before, and welcome back if you have seen my 2 vlogs to date. I've got a lot of video tutorials on this channel to do with crochet patterns, but I've only just started this idea of vlogging. And this is my 3rd one. So today what I'm doing is going to, I haven't introduced myself, my apologies. My name is Marion and I am the hands and head behind the name WoolThreadPaint. I design crochet blankets and sell the patterns on Etsy, Ravelry and Wool Warehouse. And at the moment I've got, I think, roughly 21 patterns running in my Etsy shop. They are all blankets or afghans if you prefer that name, and simple to make. I don't go in for complicated crochet patterns, but I might use quite complicated colours, and that's what really is the core of my crochet designs. So to get on with this vlog, I have to say that it should have been a blog, not a vlog, because I also have a blog. I'll put the link to it below, and I write a kind of newsletter on a very roughly monthly basis on this blog, just updating everybody with what's been happening in the world of WoolThreadPaint in the previous month. So it got quite late. June was a busy month for me really, and it was well into July and quite late one night when I decided to write my blog. And it takes me about 3 or 4 hours to write it. You know, I write a paragraph, I reread it, I take words out, add words, change things, write another paragraph, look for some photos to put in, add them in, maybe alter them slightly, all these jobs, look up other bits and pieces that I've done so that I can put them in, and it takes a while. Now, you know what, I think you probably have guessed what's happening here. So it took me about 3 or 4 hours, and it was well into the early hours of the morning, and I'd got to the very last photograph and I thought, that's not the best example of what I'm wanting to show. So I thought I would delete it and put in another one. So I pressed, I don't know, had a brainstorm. I pressed discard. And not only did the photo disappear, but the entire blog disappeared, because what I had done was pressed discard draft post. And there's no way apparently of getting that back. I swore loudly for a few minutes and then took a deep breath and went on to Google to ask on there if anybody could explain how I could possibly retrieve a discarded draft post. And there seemed to be some thought that I might be able to get it back from like a trash bin. And I found that, but it was empty. So my discarded post had been discarded completely. So I'd lost about 4 hours of written work, and I was, to use a good Scots word, totally scunnered. That means exactly what it sounds like. I was completely fed up and thought, well, I'm not going to start again on this blog. So I put it to one side, and July has moved on, and June is fading quickly in the background, because when you get to this age, the memories don't last too long. And then I thought, well, I've got this vlog now started on YouTube, so why don't I create my June blog newsletter as a June-July vlog newsletter. So long story short, here I am. So what I'm going to do with this is I'm going to split it down into a couple of 2 or 3 smallish parts, and I'll just talk briefly about what WoolThreadPaint has been up to in the month of June, because it has been a very busy June without necessarily a lot of productivity, and I'll explain that. First of all, just making it into the beginning of June was the finish of my Rosy Gem blanket update. Now, the Gem blanket collection is a collection of 3 different colorways of a very popular blanket design of mine, and they again are on in all my Etsy and Ravelry shops. But they had been, what would you say, they'd been victims of the occasional yarn being discontinued. Now this is something that blights my life as a designer every year. When yarn companies decide to sometimes just take colours out of a range, or sometimes even delete a range altogether, or in the case of one of my favourite yarns a few years ago, go bust and close down completely, it really leaves the designer of the pattern quite high and dry, because we have to find alternatives to the colours that have been discontinued, and sometimes it's not that easy. Anyway, the Gem blanket collection, yeah, there were certain gaps in that, and I thought it was time to give it an overhaul, add in the new colours, and at the same time maybe a little tweak here and there in the pattern just to improve it. So I decided to pick one of the blankets and remake it. And the reason for that was I don't think the original one had the quantities of yarn used, because I hadn't weighed them. I do that now. I weigh my yarn when I've taken a colour and used it all in the blanket. I weigh what's left, and then I can tell how much I've used. So I hadn't done that with the original pattern. So I took the Rosy Gem as the prototype and made a new blanket. It's over here. I'll just try and bring it closer for you. So this is the Rosy Gem, and it's made up of granny squares and granny stripes. It's very simple to do, but you do get a nice effect with the colours, and the colours are the most important thing in my blankets. So one of the colours that I had to replace was the one, if I put this a bit closer, you can see this variegated yarn, and the original yarn had been discontinued. So I picked Stylecraft Batik Elements new colour called Fire, which actually I think works even better than the original one. You can see it's got all these kind of rose petal potpourri colours running through it, which is perfect for the Rosy Gem. I've used it again in other bands of granny stripes and other bits and pieces. So that was in, and I think I changed 1 or 2 other colours, simplified some of the colours that weren't necessary to be in there, and overall I think I've improved the pattern. I also took out some of the grey, because this joining colour had been a mid-grey, and I felt that I wanted to accentuate the rosy colours, so I used the pink instead. So that had been actually a May project, but it was the beginning of June when this was finally finished, and I was able to upload the new pattern to my shops. So that was the beginning of June. Right, I'm going to throw this over the chair and come back. Right, the next job in June is something that I'd actually don't have in front of me because it was a lot of computer work, and I mean a lot. I'll show you, I'll put in a few images of what I was doing to let you see, but it was quite timely because Wool Warehouse, which I'm sure most of you have heard of, it's a UK-based online yarn retailer, but they'll ship worldwide, and apparently, according to my American followers who absolutely love Wool Warehouse, do not be put off if you're not in the UK and you want to order from them. It's a really good service they provide worldwide. Anyway, Wool Warehouse had suggested that they produce some yarn packs. They've already got a few of mine online, but they said that they would be happy to do more. So I thought, right, this is the time. If they're going to do the yarn pack, then I need to overhaul another bundle of patterns and make sure that all the yarns in them are available, and also maybe, like I said, with the gem collection, tweak them a little if necessary, improve the layout, you know, just a little bit of housework really. And also at that point, create two versions, a UK version if you like the UK crochet terms, and a US version if you prefer the US crochet terms. So that was my job. I sat down at my computer for probably the first half of June, most days, and worked through I picked 8 patterns and updated them with replacement colours where necessary, and did the 2 different versions. And so now when I was happy with the patterns, I uploaded them to the Wool Warehouse website. So they actually sell the yarn packs, but they also sell the pattern if you want to do it all in a one-stop shop. The pattern is not included in the yarn pack. You have to buy it. So the yarn pack is purely the cost of the yarn, and then the pattern, you can buy it from Wool Warehouse if you want, or you can buy it from my Etsy or Ravelry shops. Now, if you're buying any of these patterns from Wool Warehouse, you need to decide at the point of purchase whether you want the UK or the US version, because you'll only get one. They've got 2 separate patterns for sale. In my Etsy and Ravelry shops, however, when you buy the pattern, both versions are available to you, and you can choose which one you want to download. So there's just a little difference there. Yeah, so it's going to make ordering a lot easier if you want to use Wool Warehouse. I'm not saying you have to, because there are a couple of other smaller retailers who do yarn packs for me. There's one on Etsy, Craftopia, I'll link that. And then there's another one, which I can't remember the name, but I'll put that down below as well. And you can buy yarn packs from them too. But whichever one you choose, buying the yarn pack is a great way of clicking a button and you get all the yarns that you need for the design. This works if you want to start from the beginning with full balls of all the colours that you are going to be using. But if you already have an extensive stash of yarn like this, and some might not be full balls, there might be bits and pieces left over from previous patterns, I will give you the amounts that you need for each colour in the pattern. So if you've got, say, 60 grams of, let's let's see, 60 grams of Cypress Green from the Stylecraft Special range, and my pattern says you need 45 grams, then you're fine. You don't need to order anymore. You've got it. So I know that some of my customers have told me that they've been able to buy a pattern and looked at the yarn list and thought, don't need to order anything because I've got everything that is needed. So that's great. It's a great way of using up your yarn. So anyway, that was all done in the first 2 weeks of June, and it was uploaded. I'm pretty sure all the patterns and yarn packs have now been uploaded to Wool Warehouse, so it's all systems go for those. Boy, I was ready to do some crocheting again after those 2 weeks, I can assure you. In between all that, we had 2 birthdays in June. My daughter's birthday at the beginning and my sister's birthday at the end. Actually, her birthday's in the 1st of July, but she was staying with us the weekend before that, so we had a birthday party for her. We had visits on, I think, 3 weekends running. We were like a B&B for a few weeks, which was great. I love it. I love having family and friends staying over, so we had that. So June kind of disappeared all of a sudden. It was so much happening. We always do our walks. We always do our beach walks, so we were doing that, and garden was needing attention. So I had a few days of back-breaking stuff, and lots of nice lunches in the garden and making use of the nice sunshine that we had, I think, in June. So yeah, that all happened. When I got the patterns uploaded, I thought it's time to make a start on something new. And the first thing I did was my very first vlog, and that was a kind of spur of the moment thing where I decided to take you on a tour of my studio. This is, if you haven't seen it, this is my studio, and it is a big room, although this is just a corner of it, but it's a big room with a lot of stuff. So the vlog number 1 is the studio tour, and then vlog number 2, which was about 3 weeks ago, so I'm guessing that was still at the end of June, is about, what was vlog number 2 about? I've lost it. Oh yeah, my embroidery and crochet. So you'll find these in my channel. So that was interesting. I've learned a lot, although it's hard to say that I've actually can show what I've learned on here, but I have learned a lot about this old videoing business. And that was probably one of the most important starts to the month of July, was thinking that I might be going down this vlogging route. One of the things I did when I was showing you the studio tour was I showed you a little bit, a glimpse into the life I had before I was crocheting, and that was running a business, making cards. It sounds like it was just a little stay-at-home, well, it was a stay-at-home business for 30 odd years, but it got quite big. It became quite a big family concern, and we've since passed it over to our daughter. My husband and I were working together in the business, and my daughter and her husband have taken it over, and it's off the premises now. This is why I have this lovely big studio to work in. So one of the things I was doing when I was doing the studio tour was showing you some of the bits and pieces that I had left over from when I had the card business. And a few people got quite intrigued by it, particularly the little squares of fabric, the tiny little postage stamp sized squares of fabric that I had cut by the 1,000 to make patchwork cards. So I think later on in this video, I'm going to give you a little demonstration. I never, in a month of Sundays, would have thought that I'd be doing a demonstration on how to make a patchwork card, because that's, like I say, that was a life I left behind 5 years ago, and I think it was 10 years since I made the patchwork cards, but there seems to be an interest, so I thought I would do a little demonstration on how to make one. So that comes up in a minute or two on this video. The other thing I've been doing is designing and starting to work on my new Christmas blanket for 2024. And that all started in June, and it became my major project. It took me a while to make a start to it. I had an idea of colours in mind, and I had a name in mind, and I had to kind of put it all together into a blanket design. So the name is the Sugar Plum Blanket, and of course sugar plums are synonymous with Christmas. They are part of the very famous Night Before Christmas poem, which has it's been a major part of my Christmas life from when I was a little girl to when I used to read it to my children and then read it to my grandchildren. So the line in The Night Before Christmas, where it said, "The children were nestled all snug in their beds, while visions of sugar plums danced in their heads." I had no idea what a sugar plum was. I don't know, maybe I thought it was an actual plum which had been covered in sugar, or was it a hard boiled sweet? I had no idea, but it had such a lovely sounding name. And then of course there's the dance of the sugar plum fairy in the Nutcracker Suite, and the fairy is dressed in lovely plummy purpley colours. So that was my idea. I just had to design a blanket using colours. So I went from a mood board, which you go down the rabbit hole of Pinterest and start looking for things and putting them onto a board, and it can eat up a whole day. So I collected lots of purpley, plummy colours, and along the way I discovered what a sugar plum actually is, and that's going to be part of my big reveal when I reveal the blanket when it's finished and the pattern is ready. But I got my mood board, I got ideas for that, and then I used my yarn pegs. I'll link where I get them from below, but the yarn pegs were a great way of figuring out the colour schemes that I wanted, and I started with one. It's like a kind of jigsaw. You list out all the yarn pegs, and then you take out colours, add other colours, and take photos of them, and then try something else until I whittle it down to the colours that I want to use. Even then, I probably take and add colours along the way when I actually start working, but it gives me the basis. And then I start. Now I'm going to give you a quick glimpse of the sugar plum blanket. It's not quite finished yet, and I don't really want to talk too much about it because it's going to have its own vlog when it is finished, which will be quite soon. But this is the sugar plum. I'm going to just give you an idea of the center of it, and it has lots of plummy, lilac-y, purpley, even the sort of pinky lilac in it. It's got what looks like holly, snowflakes, and possibly a poinsettia, and it's got hearts. You see the hearts there? And a kind of candy cane. It's got everything Christmassy going about it. Now, this, as I say, isn't finished yet, so I'm going to hide it away again, and the next vlog will tell all. So yeah, that's been my newsletter for June and up till now in July. I've just got that blanket to finish, and then I have to write the pattern and do some videos for it. And I hope that's not going to take me too long, because although this is only July, it takes me a few weeks to write the pattern, do the videos, get them published, and then people need to think about buying it if they want to make it for Christmas. They've got to have enough time to make it in time for Christmas. So it all happens in the middle of the summer. I'm always making Christmas blankets in June or July. It's been pretty hot up here in the studio because this attic studio is in the eaves of the roof of the house, and when it gets warm and sunny, then this place becomes very hot. Not the best place for crocheting, but today's not too bad. It's warm, it's very warm today for Scotland. When I say very warm, we're not talking tropical temperatures, but it's warm, but it's slightly overcast, so it's not too bad up here. If you can hear a funny buzzing noise in the background, it's somebody on the farm trimming the edges of the fields, keeping the weeds down, and there's not much I can do about that, but that's the noise if you hear it in the background. So now I'm going to move on and give you a quick little demonstration on the patchwork cards, and then I'll be back to say my farewells for this vlog. Now for these cards, I used to cut out from, let's see if I can get right under here, to cut out from pieces of patchwork fabric or pieces of fabric from anywhere. Some of it was clothes, old skirts and dresses, shirts, children's clothes. I would scour the charity shops for bits and pieces of things, because you could buy a whole maybe flowery skirt for £2 or £3, which would give you maybe 2 or 3 meters of fabric, as well as going to craft shops and buying fat quarters of patchwork fabrics. And these I cut up into 1-inch squares, but only after I backed them with this iron-on, here we go, this iron-on paper glue, which is called Bond-A-Web. And that's what I'm going to start with, because that's how I attached these squares onto the fabric, onto the cards, so that they didn't fray around the edges. So you can see that in here I've got hundreds and hundreds of little bits. These were the ones for the flower patchwork cards that I've just shown you in the image. I'll put that to one side. And what I said I was using is this, which is Bond-A-Web. Now, if I hold this really close to the camera, you might see that this has got a rough side and a smooth side. It just looks like greaseproof paper, but it is actually a film of glue, which is lightly adhered to a piece of greaseproof paper, and you iron it onto your fabric, and then you can cut round it and it stops the fabric from fraying. But first of all, we need to get squares, 1-inch squares, drawn on here. So what I used to do, I think I used this, I can't remember now, it's so long ago, but this is a just a graph paper jotter, and I need a sharp pencil. I'll see if this one works. You just lay it in place. Now what I used to do was I used to trace off large piles of this paper, this Bond-A-Web, and then use them when I needed to. So I'm tracing off some squares. This is 1-inch squares. I'm just going to do a few. So I've drawn the horizontal lines, and I'm going to draw some vertical lines. I'm going to do one more And then I'm going to cut out what I don't need. I had a pair of scissors. Here we go. I'll use that. I would normally use that for more later on, but this is the piece that I want to iron onto my fabric. I don't want to waste the fabric, so I'm going to cut my Bondi web down so that there's just a tiny margin around the drawn lines. And here's a piece of cotton, and you can see how much it gets eaten into when you're making these patchwork cards. You know, this is not too bad, but there's some bits where it's just had little bits taken out here and there, and it looks like it's been chewed up, but this is going to be all right. So what my next job is to decide which is the gluey side and which is the paper side. So I've drawn on the paper side, and I'm going to lay it on top of my fabric, and the fabric is on its wrong side. Now I'm going to go over to where my iron is, so I'll be back in a second. Right, I'm over at my ironing table now, and this is a heat resistant pad that I have on the table. This is just my cheap iron. It's not set at steam, it's just a dry iron, and I've laid my Bondi web on top of the wrong side of the material, and I'm just going to iron it down. Just doesn't take much, but just need to make sure that your glue on the other side of the Bondi web has stuck to the fabric. And then I'm going to just cut that out. So once the Bondi web has been ironed on nice and firmly, you can use sharp scissors and cut the squares out. And you've got just a tiny margin of waste. It could be even less than that. I've seen me using just tiny scraps of maybe a baby dress that I've picked up in a charity shop, which has got the most, I remember one that had the prettiest little flower pattern on it, but there wasn't a lot of available fabric because it was a tiny baby dress, and I used every scrap of that fabric. So there are my squares cut out. And they still have their paper backing on, and that's how I would store them in the box with the paper backing on. Of course, they need to have the backing taken off so that I can iron them onto the card, and that's the next job. These are my little squares that I've just cut out, and since there's a blue and a blue flower in each one of these with a tiny little red centre, I've looked out some other blue fabric which has little red centres, and then a red spotty fabric for the middle. And this is what's called a 9 patch in patchwork. So you have 3 rows of 3 squares, and they kind of form a pattern round a centre one, and that was the way I used to make my patchwork cards. So I've figured out that that's what I'm going to do, and this was the fun part really, because I had so many colours. I had flower ones which would maybe have some spots or stripes or solids in them. You know, there's a nice bright pink one, for example. I also had tartan ones, and I had a whole range of Christmas ones. I used to make Christmas patchwork cards, which were really popular. But anyway, this is a flower card. Now, my cards I used to buy by the tens of thousands. You can buy this size of card quite easily. This was a square card. I think this is not actually one of the cards, because I've just taken a piece of the thickest paper that I could find in the studio and cut it out, but it's roughly a 4-inch square. And that's the size my cards were. So I'm going to lay that down and take, now if you, I'm assuming you're not like me, not having done this before, you would probably need to measure this, where to put this, to put your squares in the middle, but I will just do it by eye because I've done so many thousands of them. So I would take my first square. This has still got its paper backing on, so I can just use my thumbnail to separate it from the fabric and pull it off. And if you just check, there's a rubbery feel to the back of the fabric, so the glue is on the fabric. And I'm going to lay that down on my card. I'm going to take the next one and do the same thing. My nails are short. I keep my nails short for crocheting, and that's not so good for the patchwork. Take my time, but I'll get there. There we go. That's it separated. And pop that down. They're just butting against each other. Put another one down. I prefer to put all my squares down on the card before I iron them, and that way I can reposition them if I feel that something isn't quite right. If it's not going to lie straight, for example, I can change it around. If I start just ironing one on at a time, it will I'm going to take another of these. If you start ironing one on at a time, then it becomes impossible to change. Sorry about this, I'm just needing to find one. Yeah. If you leave your ironed on Bondi web for a few minutes, and I didn't with these ones, it's much easier to peel off. So I've just taken one out of the box that's older. I've got my center one to do. And another one of those. And two more of these. These are not particularly good if you want to go into business doing cards, because as you can see, each one of these takes a very long time to do in terms of greeting cards. But I had it down to a fine art when I was doing these as part of my business, and they were only a small part of the business. They weren't the mainstay of the cards, but they were they became very collectible, and people would come and buy 5 at a time. I had one lady came every year and bought 100 Christmas ones for all her friends and family, and then came back the next year and got another 100. She just loved them so much. So that's me, got my 9 patch on the card. You need something between you and the card and the iron so that the iron doesn't move the squares or stick in any way. So normally I would use baking parchment or greaseproof paper, and to save me going downstairs and rummaging in the kitchen drawer, I've just got an old piece of tracing paper. So what I do is I don't try and place it too roughly on the card. What I usually do is I just put my hand on just off the card and then let it fall, and that just means that the squares don't move. And then I'm going to just very carefully iron over the top. And that's my patchwork card at this point. Now, glutton for punishment that I was, that wasn't the end of it for me, because I felt that it needed a little bit more. If you look closely at the card, the edges of the squares are fine, but they're not pin sharp. And what I tended to do after that was to use a little bit of fabric paint. This is my old trusty colour point bottle. These bottles are difficult to get hold of now, but I had them for a long time and decanted from great big bottles of fabric. I used to buy bottles of fabric paint that looked like gallon-sized bottles and decant them into that because I like the nozzle. And then I'm just going to outline along the edge of the squares. I'm a little bit rusty at doing this because it's been 10 years since I've done it, but that just fills in any small gaps along the joints. So I do the horizontals in one direction and then the horizontals in, turn it round by 90 degrees and work across the way again. I am very rusty at this. I could have done this in a fraction of the time 10 years ago. So that's my fabric paint outline. That takes a few minutes, maybe 20 minutes or so to dry. And then I have one last thing that I want to do to just finish it off. The last little thing that I do on these cards is to add a little bit of embellishment. My card, which is sitting drying here, it's blue and red. So I have got red flowers, and I usually put one flower in the middle on top of the center square. Now I could use red or blue. I think if I used to use red, it would disappear against the red spotty fabric, so I'm going to use the blue. On my conveyor belt of cards, when I used to make these, I would do a whole batch where I ironed on the squares, and then I would sit and do the fabric paint outline. This was silver glitter, by the way. It might be, I've got a really nice, almost iridescent glitter, which is very subtle, or it might be, the tartan ones had a black outline. The Christmas ones would probably most likely be gold glitter. But I would do a batch of these and then I would stand them up like that to dry. And then finally I would add the embellishment. So I'm going to pop back when this has dried. So about 20 minutes or so have passed and my fabric paint is tacky. It's still slightly wet, but I'm just going to go ahead and put my little flower on now. 20 minutes where I was intending to do a little bit more to my crochet blanket, but instead I scrolled through Instagram, as you do. Now, when I used to glue these flowers onto cards, I had a industrial sized glue gun, which was on all the time, virtually all day, and I just would grab glue and stick. But I'm not going to bother putting my glue gun on for just one flower, so I'm just going to use a glue stick to put my flower down this time. So I'm just going to give it a liberal coating of the glue. This glue stick is actually pretty permanent once it dries. And I'm going to pop it down somewhere in the middle of my red square and just press. And that's my card finished. It's been such a long time since I made these patchwork cards. I've still got hundreds and hundreds of squares of fabric in tartans and in florals. I've got hundreds of these little flowers. So if anybody is interested, I have in the past sold bags of them in my Etsy shop. They're not in my Etsy shop at the moment, but if anybody is interested, drop a comment if you would like to pick up some bags, little plastic bags of the floral squares, tartan squares, or the rosebud embellishments, and I'll pop them back into my Etsy shop. But that, for those of you who asked, and there were a surprising number of people were interested in how these cards are made, this is how I made the patchwork cards. If you're somebody who does patchwork and quilting and you have lots of tiny scraps of fabric left over that aren't really big enough to do anything major with, you could do your own range of patchwork cards. That might be a side hustle where you could make a little bit of money. Obviously, they are quite time consuming, so you would need to be careful about pricing, but there are shortcuts you can take, and the more you do, the quicker you get. So yeah, that was my demonstration for today on making a patchwork card. There we are. That's my newsletter for June and almost 3 weeks in July, because we're at the 19th of July now. I will do these newsletters as vlogs, I think, in the future, and avoid the risk of messing up my blog again. I can get more into talking to you anyway. And so I'm just going to leave you with one last glimpse of my sugar plum blanket, because I have got a little surprise border going around the edge, and it's a glittery one. Can you see that? So I will be finished this blanket today, I think. My pattern will be starting right away, and the next time you see me, the next vlog on here will be a big one about this blanket and all the different parts to it, and that will be when the pattern is released as well. So I will see you then, and hopefully it won't be too long, because time marches on and it will soon be Christmas. Bye for now.